For the first time, the International Criminal Court has launched a probe against Israel and Hamas for alleged war crimes. The move drew sharp criticism from Israel and praise from Hamas.
It's undiluted anti-Semitism and the height of hypocrisy. Without any jurisdiction, it decided that our brave soldiers, who take every precaution to avoid civilian casualties against the worst terrorist in the world, who deliberately target civilians, it's our soldiers who are war criminals.
Hamas welcomes the decision to open an investigation into the Israeli war crimes against our Palestinian people.
The ICC prosecutor points to the 2014 Gaza war. She believes Hamas attacked Israeli civilians, used its own people as human shields, and tortured political rivals. And she thinks Israel responded with disproportionate force against Palestinian civilians in 2014 and during border riots in 2018. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem with more. So, Chris, you've covered both the 2014 war with Hamas and the border demonstrations in 2018. What can you tell us about those conflicts in light of the decision by the ICC?
Well, Ephraim, on those two rules of engagement there in 2014 and 2018, they were very strict by the IDF. For example, in 2014, that was Operation Protective Edge that was designed to stop rocket fire into Israel. And what Israel did is that they texted Gazans to leave conflict areas. They dropped leaflets to warn people to get out of those areas. And they used precision munitions designed to hit just the building they wanted to target. In 2018, there were massive demonstrations on the border. They warned people to get away. They used bullhorns. They fired tear gas, warning shots. Then they shoot people to wound if they were trying to cross over into Israel. And then they took lethal action. Also, it's important to note, Ephraim, that at the decision by the ICC, the jurisdiction was one day after Hamas kidnapped 3 Israeli boys. Those boys were eventually killed. That was a big reason for the war. Now, that's not part of this indictment by the ICC.
So what makes this decision so unique?
Well, Ephraim, it's the only situation where the ICC is investigating a non-member state. Israel is not part of the ICC jurisdiction, and at the urging of a member that is not a state, the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is not a state, doesn't qualify as a state, and many people just see this as a way to delegitimize Israel. So there's 123 nations that are members. Israel is not one of them.
How does this ruling affect Jewish communities in the West Bank, the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria?
Well, the ICC regards the transfer of civilians into occupied territories as a war crime, yet this is a new offense. Israel's not displacing anyone, and the statute was written just for Israel. And here's why. At the suggestion of some of the Arab states, they expanded, like Morocco, they expanded the definition of the Geneva Convention. And now they say people that are directly or indirectly transporting civilians into, quote, occupied territories are liable under this offense by the ICC. It's not meant to deter a war crime, but an ongoing process, which is exactly what's happening in biblical Judea and Samaria. It's also interesting to note that the ICC hasn't taken any action against Russia that transported thousands of Russians into Crimea several years ago. So what this does as well is it really puts an individual responsibility for, say, mayors in Judea and Samaria that might be liable for what the ICC is prosecuting Israel for.
And what does this mean for Israeli leaders like former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz?
Well, right now the process takes a long time, and it depends on what's happening, you know, in the world at that time. It's good to note, or interesting to note, that it's only been 8 convicted in 20 years since the ICC started in 2001. Now, the ICC can issue arrest warrants, but it's really up to the member nations, those 123 members of the ICC, to enforce them. So really the impact is really more symbolic and diplomatic. And again, it makes many people feel this decision by the ICC was just meant to demonize Israel in the eyes of the world and put them on the defensive. Many people say this is not warfare, but lawfare against the Jewish state.
All right, CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem. Thank you.